My brother held the phone up so I could see my own studio through the camera, and he was laughing. Behind him, two men I didn't recognize were pulling my drafting table apart from the wall. My fabric samples, 3 years of carefully sourced swatches I had organized by texture, weight, and light behavior were stuffed into garbage bags. My brother had a coffee in his free hand. He looked completely at ease. He looked like a man who had already won. "I need you to hear this from me directly," he said, his voice carrying that tone he always used when he thought he was being generous. "Mom and Dad agree. This space is wasted on you. You work from home half the time anyway. I've been putting together something real, something with actual foot traffic, actual customers. I'm turning this into a content studio and gaming lounge. The lease is in the building's name, not yours. We talked to the landlord. He'll transfer it. You have until Friday to clear out whatever's left." I watched him set his coffee down on my light table, the one I had saved for 8 months to buy. "Be reasonable," he said. "You know you can't afford to fight this. You're barely breaking even." I looked at the camera for a long moment. Then I said, "Okay." He blinked. He had been braced for tears, for an argument, for the version of me that cried on the phone to our mother afterward. That version of me had shown up reliably for 31 years. He didn't know I had already stopped being her. "I'll start packing this weekend," I said. "Good," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice, and underneath it, the disappointment that I hadn't made it dramatic enough for him. "I knew you'd be reasonable. This is better for the whole family." I told him I'd be in touch. I hung up. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop and I started working. To understand why I didn't scream, you have to understand what my family looked like from the inside. I was the second child, which in my family meant I was the useful one. My brother was 3 years older and had the particular gift of making every failure sound like a pivot. The restaurant concept that never got off the ground was an investment in market research. The dropshipping business that collapsed in 4 months was ahead of its time. The personal training venture, the mobile app, the 2 separate attempts at real estate wholesaling, each one, my parents described to their friends as a learning experience, while quietly asking me to help cover what he owed. I didn't build my studio on family money. I built it on 4 years of taking every freelance project I could get while working a full-time job at a firm I didn't love. I designed hotel lobbies for clients I never met, and wrote invoices at midnight, and woke up at 5 to answer emails from contractors in different time zones. When I finally had enough saved to sign a lease on a real space, I chose carefully. A 2nd-floor unit in a converted industrial building in a neighborhood that was just starting to move. Good natural light. A freight elevator. A landlord who had owned the building for 20 years and had no interest in drama. I spent 3 months turning that raw space into something. Not just aesthetically, I mean structurally. I understood the building codes. I pulled the permits for every modification myself because I had learned early that the paperwork was the protection. I knew which walls were load-bearing, which outlets were on separate circuits, and exactly what the certificate of occupancy allowed the space to be used for. Design studio. That was the classification. The building sat in a mixed-use commercial zone with specific restrictions on assembly occupancy. A gaming lounge with regular public foot traffic and entertainment programming would require a separate use permit. A content studio with regular live events would need additional sound ordinance compliance review. I knew this the way I knew my own floor plan, which is to say completely, and without having to look it up. My brother did not know this. He had never read a lease in his life. I sat with that knowledge for a long time before I decided what to do with it. The call had come on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I had made 3 decisions. The first was that I was not going to fight him openly. I had tried that approach with my family before, and I knew exactly how it played out. I would become the villain. My mother would call me cold. My father would say something about blood being thicker and how I should be supporting my brother instead of standing in his way. My brother would perform devastation so convincingly that everyone around him would forget he was the one who had walked into my studio with hired movers and started throwing my work into trash bags. The narrative would flip before I could finish a sentence. It always did. The second decision was that I was not going to warn him about the zoning. The third decision was the one that took me the longest to make. I sat in my apartment that Thursday night with a glass of water I didn't drink, and I thought about a conversation I'd had years ago with a structural engineer I'd worked with on a renovation project. She had told me about a negotiation strategy she called the open door. When someone is trying to force their way through your wall, she said, you don't reinforce the wall. You open the door wider than they were expecting, and you let them walk all the way through into the room you've already prepared. My brother wanted the studio. He wanted it badly enough to call my landlord, to involve my parents, to send movers before I had agreed to anything. That want was momentum, and momentum, when redirected, does all the work for you. I drafted the letter that night. I told my landlord I was considering relinquishing my lease for personal reasons. I asked whether a transfer to another tenant was possible and what the requirements would be. He responded quickly and professionally, as he always did, and told me that any new tenant would need to submit a new use permit application describing their intended business operations. Standard procedure. The building had specific zoning compliance requirements that the city reviewed on any tenancy change. I forwarded that email to my brother with 3 words. Here's the process. He called me within the hour. already impatient. "This is just bureaucratic stuff," he said. "I'll handle it." "You'll need to describe exactly what you're planning to do with the space," I said. "The application asks for business type, expected occupancy numbers, any entertainment or amplified sound components." "Yeah, I know how to fill out a form," he said. "Great," I said. "I just want to make sure you have everything you need." He filed the application himself. I know this because he texted me a photo of the confirmation page, proud of himself for completing a government form without assistance. The application described in specific detail a gaming and entertainment lounge with a capacity of 40, regular weekend programming, DJ nights on Fridays, and a content creation stage for live streaming. He had described, in his own words and with his own signature, exactly the kind of operation the building's zoning classification would not allow. I didn't call the city. I didn't need to. The application would trigger an automatic review. All I had to do was let the process run. In the meantime, I moved. Not reluctantly, not bitterly. I had spent the week before the formal lease transfer making calls I should have made 6 months earlier. There was a newer building 2 blocks south, with ground floor commercial units, and a landlord who had just finished a renovation. Better layout, better loading access, better ceiling height. I had looked at it once before and decided I wasn't ready. I was ready now. I signed a new lease on a Friday afternoon. The monthly rate was higher, and I covered the deposit from a project payment that had just cleared. I didn't tell my family I had found a new space. I let them believe I was scrambling. My brother took possession of the old studio on a Monday. By Wednesday, he had posted a video online announcing the launch of what he was calling the Apex Creative Lounge. He had hired someone to paint a logo on the exposed brick wall. He had ordered custom LED panels and a professional-grade streaming desk. He talked about his vision for the space with the particular confidence of someone who had never completed a vision before but had also never stopped believing in the next one. My parents appeared in the comments within the hour. My mother wrote that she was so proud. My father wrote that this was the kind of entrepreneurial spirit the family had always had. Neither of them mentioned me by name, but my mother had texted me separately that morning to say she hoped I was handling the transition well, and that sometimes change was good for people who got too attached to things. I read the message, set my phone face down, and went back to sketching a kitchen layout for a new client. The use permit review came back in 3 weeks. I know the timing because my brother called me on a Thursday evening, and the call started with silence before he spoke, which meant he was either furious or frightened. My brother was rarely frightened. "Did you know about the zoning thing?" he said. "What zoning thing?" "The city sent a letter. They're saying the space can't be used for public entertainment. That I need a different permit, a different classification, some kind of occupancy, change approval." "Oh," I said. "Did you know about that when you had the space?" I let a beat pass. "I ran a design studio," I said. "That's different from a public entertainment venue. Different use classification." Another silence. "How long does the reclassification take?" he said. "I don't know," I said, which was not entirely true. I had looked it up. The process in our city for changing occupancy classification on a building in a mixed commercial zone took a minimum of 4 months and required a full building inspection, a fire safety review, possible structural modifications to meet updated assembly occupancy codes, and approval from the zoning board, which met quarterly. My brother had already posted a public launch date on social media. It was 5 weeks away. "You should call the city directly," I said. "They'll tell you what you need." He hung up without saying goodbye. I want to be honest about what the next few weeks felt like, because it wasn't clean. There were nights when I picked up my phone to call him, not to help him, exactly, but because the instinct was so old and so worn into me that it moved through me like muscle memory. I was the one who solved things in my family. I had been solving things since I was 19, and my brother needed someone to co-sign his first apartment because his credit was already ruined. I had been solving things when he called at 11 at night because a supplier was threatening to go to collections. I had been the structural wall that kept the whole family standing. And some part of me kept waiting for someone to acknowledge that, and some other part of me finally understood that the acknowledgement was never coming. I didn't call. I worked instead. I set up the new studio, and it was better than the old one in every way that mattered. I hired a part-time assistant named Danny, 23, and just out of design school, who had more organizational instinct than most people I'd worked with at the firm. I brought in 2 new clients in the first month. I started sleeping through the night. My brother's launch date arrived and passed. He did not open. He posted a brief message saying the launch was being rescheduled due to city permitting delays. His followers responded with supportive messages. A few people asked for updates. He replied to none of them. My parents called me that weekend. Not together, separately, which was always a sign that they had discussed strategy. My mother called first and asked carefully how I was feeling about everything, which was her way of checking whether I was going to be difficult. I told her I was well. She said she hoped I understood that the family had to support my brother right now because he was going through a hard time. I said I understood. My father called an hour later and told me that my brother was in a tough spot financially because he had put money into the studio build-out before the permits came through, and he asked whether I might be in a position to help out. Just temporarily. just a bridge. I had heard this sentence, in different forms, for my entire adult life. I'm not able to do that right now, I said. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said I had always been the practical one, and he thought I could see the bigger picture here. I said I did see the bigger picture. He asked what that meant. I said it meant I hoped my brother found a path forward and that I had to go. I had a client call. I didn't have a client call. I hung up and stood in the middle of my new studio for a long time, looking at the light coming through the west-facing windows, turning the space honey-colored at 4 in the afternoon, and I thought about all the years I had held myself responsible for other people's consequences, and I thought about how strange it felt to simply not do that anymore. The occupancy reclassification process, as I had looked up, and my brother had apparently not, required a full structural inspection of the space. The building inspector, who came out 3 weeks into the process, noted several things that my brother had done to the studio during his initial build-out. He had removed a partition wall to open up the streaming area. He had added 3 new electrical circuits without pulling permits. He had installed a custom ceiling rig for his LED lighting system by anchoring directly into the original rafters without an engineering assessment. The inspector flagged all 3. The ceiling rig was the problem. In a building of that age, anchoring point loads into original timber without a structural review was a code violation regardless of zoning classification. It wasn't catastrophic, not like a load-bearing wall being removed, but it was enough to trigger a stop work order and a mandatory engineering inspection before any further build-out could proceed. My brother called me the night the stop work order went up. I could hear my mother in the background. I need to know if you did this, he said. Did what? Called the city. Reported the build-out. Something. This feels like you, I said. I didn't report anything to the city. This was true. I had not made a single call. The inspector just showed up out of the blue? You filed a use permit application that triggered an automatic compliance review, I said. That's how the process works. You described your plans in writing. The city reviewed whether the space and the build-out met requirements. It didn't. Silence. You knew this would happen, he said. I knew the zoning classification, I said. I didn't know what you were going to build, or how. Another silence. Longer. I've spent $40,000, he said, and his voice had changed. The performance was gone from it. He sounded like my actual brother, the one I had grown up with before years of failure had taught him to cover everything with bravado. He sounded tired and a little scared, and I recognized that voice in a way that hurt more than the anger had. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it in the specific way I had learned to mean things, which was that I was sorry for the situation, and not for my part in it, because my part in it had been to leave a door open and let him walk through it on his own. Mom and Dad co-signed the equipment loan, he said quietly. I hadn't known that. I felt it land differently than I expected. How much? I said. $32,000 for the AV setup. I sat down. I thought about my parents and their house, which they owned outright, which my mother had mentioned recently they were thinking about refinancing for reasons I now understood differently. You need to talk to a lawyer, I said. I can't afford a lawyer. You need to talk to one anyway, I said. Find out exactly what the liability looks like if the equipment loan defaults. Find out if the co-signers are exposed. He was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Why are you helping me? He said. I'm not helping you, I said gently. I'm telling you what I would do. What you do is up to you. I don't know if he took the advice. I know that 3 weeks later my mother called me in a different kind of voice. The voice she used when things had gone past the point where she could manage them. And she told me that the equipment loan had gone into default because my brother had missed 2 payments, and that the lender was moving to collect, and that because she and my father had co-signed, their credit had been impacted and they were looking at possible action against their savings. I listened to her without saying anything. We need help, she said. I know, I said. You have the ability to. Mom, I said. I love you. I'm not able to fix this. She was quiet. Then she said, you could have warned us. I thought about that for a moment. Would you have listened? I said. She didn't answer. You told me the change was good for me, I said. You told me I was too attached. You called his vision entrepreneurial. I watched you do all of that, and I didn't say a word. But I want you to hear me now. I knew what I was doing. I knew the zoning. I knew the process. I let it happen because the only way any of us ever learn anything is by living through it. And I have spent a decade keeping you from doing that. I'm done. She started to cry. My mother was good at crying, and it had always worked on me. And I noticed that it still pulled at something deep in my chest, and I noticed also that I was not going to move. I love you, I said again. I hope you find a way through this. But I can't be the way through. I haven't been the solution to this family's problems. I've been the delay. I hung up. I sat in the quiet of my studio. Danny had gone home an hour ago. The light was long and low through the windows. On my desk, there was a mood board for a residential project I was excited about. A young couple's first home, full of choices made with care and intention. I thought about how much I liked working on spaces where people were building something real. My brother's lounge never opened. The stop work order was resolved eventually, months later, but by then the equipment was repossessed, and the lease had been surrendered. The landlord relet the unit to a small architecture firm. I heard this from a contractor I knew, not from my family. My parents took a second mortgage to cover what the default had damaged. They are still in their house. I don't know how much of the situation they genuinely understand and how much they have reframed into a version where they are still the reasonable ones and I am the one who was cold when the family needed her. I have made peace with not knowing. I don't think I did something cruel. I think I stopped doing something exhausting. I think there is a version of care that isn't protection, that looks more like letting someone meet the weight of their own choices. And I think it took me until I was 31 years old and watching my own work get thrown into garbage bags before I figured out the difference. My studio is good now, better than good. I have 3 ongoing commercial clients and a short waitlist for residential projects. Danny manages the project pipeline, and I've started teaching a weekend workshop on residential spatial planning that I charge real money for, and that fills up each session. The freight elevator in the new building works better. The light in the afternoons still goes honey-colored, and I still stand in it sometimes and just let myself feel it. I didn't send my family a message explaining everything. I didn't write a letter cataloging the years of loans and the cosigns and the bailouts and the phone calls at midnight and the ways I had quietly held a structure together that no one acknowledged was being held. I didn't need them to understand it. I lived it. I know what it cost. I know what it was worth. I know also what it feels like to work in a space that is entirely and unambiguously mine, where no one has a claim on it except the one I built by showing up every day and doing the work, where the drafting table is exactly where I placed it, and the fabric samples are organized the way I organized them, and the permits on the wall reflect the business I actually run. My brother called once more, about 2 months after everything had settled. He didn't ask for money. He asked how I was doing, which surprised me. I told him I was well. He said that was good. He asked whether I thought he should try again with a new concept, and I said honestly that I thought he should spend some time figuring out why the previous ones hadn't worked before starting another one. He got quiet. I waited. You always knew more than you let on, he said finally. It wasn't quite an apology. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was just, I think, the closest thing to the truth he could manage right then. Yeah, I said. I did. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing much. When we hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I felt the way you feel when something heavy that you've been carrying for a very long time is simply no longer in your hands, and your arms remember what it was like to be empty. And you realize that empty, in this case, is exactly the right word for something that is actually free. I went back to work. There was a set of elevations to finish by morning, and I had picked a paint color I wanted to look at in the late afternoon light before I committed to it. I pulled the swatch and held it up to the window, and it was exactly right. Which is not always how things go, but is sometimes. And when it is, you learn to notice it. Have you ever had to stop being the safety net so someone could finally learn what falling feels like? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from.